If a married woman engages in an affair, it doesn't necessarily mean she loves her lover more than her husband. Even if she maintains that relationship and continues to live with her spouse, it doesn't indicate she still has feelings for him. The truth is, she might only care for herself. A man and a woman can either be committed to each other or they can't. If one of them seeks pleasure outside of their relationship, it signals the end of that bond. Love has vanished. When true love exists, there's no need for anyone else. If you find yourself interested in someone besides your significant other, that's it. The notion of "we're together" is effectively over. A close friend of mine shared this perspective after years of our friendship. It's not particularly thrilling. No wonder it's said that all happy families share similarities, while unhappy ones each have their own struggles. So here lies a rather typical tale of betrayal and the heartache inflicted on someone who was once cherished. I'll recount his story as he shared it with me, presenting it in the first person for convenience, while adding a touch of literary flair. It's hard to call the start of my life a successful one. My parents wed when they were quite young. My mother was just 19, and my father was 21. As is often the case, they were deeply in love, and just 9.5 months after their modest wedding, I was born. But soon after, my mother had an epiphany. Living in poverty wasn't for her, and marrying my father had been a grave mistake. She found herself a wealthy lover, and without much thought, walked away from my father. He mourned for a bit but quickly moved on as well. It was clear that having a 3-year-old son was just an inconvenience. His new partner didn't exactly want to raise someone else's child either, and my mother didn't hesitate to toss me into an orphanage, renouncing her parental rights in the process. She simply dropped me off at a shelter, signed a piece of paper relinquishing her rights, and vanished from my life forever. So there I was, an orphan in an orphanage, with living parents who didn't want me. I will not go into the details of my life on government rations. It was a series of ups and downs. Somehow I managed to finish school. But what happened next? I decided to join the Army. I served, then entered the military academy. 4 years later, I graduated and became a lieutenant. My service has begun. I spent almost 5 years in the Army, facing turbulent situations and heading to hot spots, until I was wounded in the spine. I managed to recover, but I was declared unfit for further service. The Army chewed me up and spat me out into civilian life, albeit with a pension, captain's shoulder straps, and a medal for bravery. I was a mechanical engineer by trade. A month after my discharge, I landed a job at a small factory as a turner. Within a year, I was promoted to foreman of the procurement section in the machine shop, and soon enough, I was appointed head of the workshop. Having a higher engineering degree definitely paid off. My career was on the upswing, and just 2 years later, I became the deputy director. Things were moving quickly, but I was also working tirelessly, day and night. Work was important, but it was also time to start a family. Getting married was the first step. I met a lovely girl and courted her for 6 months. Flowers, sweets, and we even took a trip to the south for some sun and sea. I realized I loved her more than anything. From the very beginning, I didn't hide my background as a child from an orphanage. People often have a wary attitude towards those of us without family ties. By the time I turned 32, I had established a solid position, a company car, everything a man could want. So I proposed. My girl didn't hesitate. She said yes right away. Just like that, I became a family man. Ella and I had a good life together. She was 4 years younger than me and worked as a hairdresser in a beauty salon. We had more than enough money. The only downside was that we struggled to have kids. I can't even begin to tell you how many doctors we consulted. The answer was always the same. Everything looks good. You'll have children. So we waited, or rather, I waited, and waited. We lived in a 3-room office apartment with the option to buy it later. Our furnishings and decor were just as nice as anyone else's. About a year into our marriage, I noticed Ella began to change. She became more beautiful right before my eyes. New hairstyles, a revamped wardrobe, a shiny new ring, and she started wearing silk underwear every day. Going to work was like preparing for a special occasion. I would ask, "Who are you dressing up for?" She teased me back, "What's wrong? Are you jealous, my dear?" But jealousy was still a far-off thought. She hadn't given me a reason to feel that way. Still, her transformation seemed suspicious. It seemed obvious from the outside. Maybe there was someone else. But in reality, when you love someone, you want to believe in them until the bitter end, so I pushed those dark thoughts away. Then, for a while, my wife started staying late at work more often. Either it was a friend's birthday, or an urgent order to fulfill before a client arrived. She'd come home late, and would sometimes spend over an hour in the bathroom. With me, she was affectionate like a cat one moment, then hissing like a snake the next. Sometimes she'd snap at me for no reason. However, I was earning more money, yet that instinct I honed in the army was whispering to me that something was off. I was on the verge of discreetly discovering what my beloved wife was up to during those late nights, but fate had other plans. I was scheduled for a month-long business trip. The partners had halted the assembly line, and we were responsible for repairing the conveyor. When it was time to part, Ella even shed tears. She waved goodbye as if it were the last time. I felt emotional myself, nearly in tears, and promised to call her and not to be away too long. I kissed her, hugged her tight, and left for the airport. After checking in for my flight and sending a quick message to Ella about my departure, I was heading to the boarding terminal when the director called. He informed me that the conveyor had been launched without us, and I could return home. I attempted to call Ella to share the good news, but her phone was switched off. I shrugged it off, hopped in a taxi, and picked up flowers, champagne, and sweets along the way. I was determined to surprise my wife with a romantic candlelit evening. Themed, the return of my beloved husband. I practically floated up to the 4th floor, opening the front door with my key. I didn't ring the bell on purpose. Surprises are best revealed. The only light in the apartment glowed from the bedroom. She's probably reading, I thought. I quietly opened the door and was left speechless. My Ella, completely naked, was on all fours, resting her hands on the headboard of the bed. Behind her was a hairy, ape-like man, also naked, wearing a victorious grin as he rhythmically thrust into her, one hand gripping her hair. My wife was moaning in sync with his movements, periodically banging her head against the headboard, gasping in pleasure. "Yes, oh yes, you're the best." Both of them were so engrossed in the moment that they didn't notice me standing there. Frozen in disbelief, I stood in a daze for what felt like an eternity, silently absorbing the scene before me, before finally clearing my throat. The man continued for a few more moments until Ella screamed and instinctively covered herself with a sheet. Unlike my wife, her lover showed no fear. He glared at me as if I were an unwelcome guest and growled in a thick accent, "Who are you? Get out of here, or I'll punch you in the face." With that, he lunged at me, baring his unshaven face. "This is my woman," he added, making no attempt to hide his shame. I sidestepped his punch, dodging to the right, and swung a bottle of champagne at his head. The bottle shattered, spraying fragments and foam everywhere, and the man grunted as he crumpled to the floor face down on the carpet. He didn't seem to need any more of a lesson. In that moment, I realized I could have killed him. Ella squeaked something, but fell silent under the weight of my stare. Stepping over the lifeless body, I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and downed it in one go. I was inexplicably thirsty. There was a flurry of movement in the bedroom, and about 10 minutes later, I heard the front door slam. Looks like the lover had made a hasty exit. A slippery bastard. 10 minutes later, Ella slipped into the kitchen, trying to explain herself. She whined and pleaded for my forgiveness, singing an old tune about feeling neglected, claiming I had stopped seeing her as a woman. She even had the audacity to say she cheated out of a profound love for me. According to her twisted logic, the more a woman loves a man, the more often she strays. If I forgave her, she promised to bear my children and help us build a happy family. I listened to her nonsense in silence, wanting nothing more than for her to vanish from my life forever. The divorce was swift, as we had no property disputes or children. A bespectacled woman, worn down by life, stamped my passport, and just like that, I was single again. Yet, oddly enough, this newfound status didn't bring me any joy. After the divorce, Ella didn't give up trying to win me back. She even approached the factory director, sobbing dramatically and recounting how much she loved me, pleading that I was being cruel to punish her for what she called an innocent prank. As it turned out, her hairy lover was the director of the grocery market. There were attempts to confront me, but I coldly promised to take care of him. Not in the way one might think, but I assured him I'd deal with him severely. I was so convincing that he stopped pursuing romantic encounters with me. I didn't follow how Ella's life developed after that. I just didn't care. I've come to the conclusion that it's time for a change. I quit my job at the factory, rented a new apartment, and moved in. The past is behind us.